Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Microgravity Mischief. This is the second episode in a series of going big to Mars, for which I don't know how many episodes they're going to be because I've only flown the first wave out to Mars, the first wave being the orbital, Mars Duna. I think of it both ways. But anyway, I've only flown out the Duna Gateway Orbital Station. The ground-based station is now in orbit, and the rover and lander are now in orbit, and the inclination is set. The idea is to land on Olympus Mons at the top and set up a station way up there on the 60,000 foot mountain on Mars that dwarfs the Earth's Mount Everest. And so anyway, here in the second episode is the building of the Duna Gateway Station. And the idea here, given the limited tools in KSP, I have learned through several different players like Matt Lown and a few others how to build something that gives the illusion of large. And so, like I said in the first episode, we don't want to be sending astronauts out in these tiny pressure vessels into space to live for 4 years, because it's a 6-month window out there, but then it's about a year wait for the window back, and then a 6-month trip back. So you're looking at least 2 years round trip. And if they're going to be out there that long, you want plenty of space, and obviously you want plenty of storage space for food and water, and you want redundant systems. So I mean, all that stuff, all the life support systems and stuff like that take up a lot of space. So I'm trying to be realistic in how big you'd have to go, and I think that's one of the reasons that SpaceX is going to succeed, is because they're going big, but they're also going big in the amount of rockets they make. So they're going to solve the same problem. Instead of having to build these huge space stations, they're just going to send 1,000 starships out to Mars and land probably, 3/4 of them, which will be enough habitation for thousands of people. But if you only populate it with hundreds of people, then they're going to have plenty of room to move around inside these ships. So anyway, I'm rambling on a little bit here. So I'm using the fairing as a actual habitat in this case, and I'm putting in these little command. These are actually for rovers, and so what I'm doing is making it look like this is just a huge place to live in orbit. So if you fill a place that you can have 800 people in with about 10 or 20 people, it becomes quite livable, I think. And so you can see while I'm building it that it's obviously not on the inside what it appears to be from the outside, and that's the whole point of this conversation. So, moving forward, I've got 2 docking ports down at the bottom there, and then a third docking port coming out of the bottom that is much larger for the fuel tank that I'm going to install, so that the lander can come dock up with the space station, refuel, and fly its missions back down to the surface, carrying people and equipment, and can go on multiple runs. The other thing is, there's 2 reasons that I'm not putting in a spinning artificial gravity environment into this space station, is that tends to bring out the Kraken, and the game gets buggy and the whole thing breaks apart. So I've learned my lesson on that. So the idea here is that I'm going to send this out unoccupied to Mars or Duna, and since it's going to be used as a gateway station, the astronauts or the Kerbal-nauts are going to go down to the surface of Mars. They're not going to be in zero gravity environments, or in this zero gravity environment, for extended periods of time. They're going to be mostly on the Duna Mars surface. So the vessel that I send out to Mars on the second run, so I'm going to preemptively send this stuff out to Duna and get it in place, and then wait for the next Mars window from Earth or Kerbin here to send out the the actual Kerbinauts, and I'm going to use a smaller space station with a spinning artificial gravity well, so that they are not under 0G for that extended period of time. But it'll be much smaller and therefore less buggy, so it should make it out there without glitching out and exploding in space like it does most of the time. So now I've finished that, I'm setting up the second fairing to encompass the whole thing for aerodynamic purposes, getting up to orbit, and I've set up the second stage that's going to lift it up into orbit and rendezvous it with the freight train mechanism, so that once I undock it, I can deorbit it, as we don't want the junk to stay in space. And like I said, now I've only flown the mission so far out to Duna. I haven't landed yet, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to land the station properly. It might be tricky, but I've committed to it because I've already released my first video and this video. And so I think I'm going to maybe release the third video before I get back to flying, and hopefully that goes smoothly so I don't have a half a video series out there that feels very incomplete. I would be a little bit embarrassed about that, but I have confidence that I'm going to be able to do it. So here we are, the build is complete, and we're going to send this up into orbit, and then we're going to rendezvous with the freight train booster and drag assembly. And of course, I like to speed up the footage on the launch. Once again, if you're watching Oliver, if you look closely, the gravity turn that we take, at least till about 45 degrees, you're going to be accelerating 100 kilometers or 100 meters a second per 10 degrees that you pitch over in your gravity turn. And it's just kind of the normal method to do it, and it tends to work quite well. So now that we're in orbit, we've extended our solar arrays for power. We're going to fly to our apoapsis and fly prograde to raise us up into a stable orbit. And then we're going to place a maneuver node somewhere out in front of us. We're in the teal ship right now, or the ship on the teal orbital trajectory, and we're going to, the idea is to rendezvous with the tugboat. So we're going to put this maneuver in and burn prograde, raise our apoapsis up to, basically this is called a transfer burn. We're going to transfer our orbit from one altitude to another. And once we get close, we click our nav ball to target, as you can see, and we face retrograde. And the idea is to cancel out your velocity relative to the ship that you're docking with, not to planet Kerbin. You want to remain in a stable orbit. Then once you do, you face directly at it and burn, and turn around retrograde so that you can cancel out your speed once again. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 of these maneuvers, sometimes it takes 1. But the reason it doesn't take 1 very often is because you're traveling around a circle. Think of it as running around a racetrack. The item on the inside line of the racetrack has a shorter distance, so it starts to get out ahead of the, let's say runner on the racetrack on the outer lane, because he has more distance to travel. And that's why you kind of get out of alignment every time you are trying to rendezvous. So here we are, I've jettisoned the booster. Now that we're in very close proximity, I've deorbited it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to dock the booster. And of course I had to, for some reason it got a little bit buggy with the heat shields there, so we're going to dock the booster to the aft end of the Duna Gateway, and we're going to dock the rear drag assembly to the top of the lunar gateway, so that when we dip it into the atmosphere to slow down, and the whole idea behind the slowdown in the atmosphere is to conserve fuel. Let the atmosphere do the work for us. Now, if you were going to the moon or to a planet like Mercury that has no atmosphere, you would not have the benefit. You'd have to use all fuel to capture yourself in orbit. So we're going to benefit from this. So now we've got the rear drag assembly docked. And when you're using your RCS thrusters to dock, if you notice the magenta on your nav ball, you notice the magenta, that's where you're facing, that's the docking port. And then the yellow is the actual direction you're going. So you use your thrusters and you move that yellow bullseye on top of the magenta bullseye, and you want to fly fairly slow, about 3.3 meters a second to about a meter a second. And as you get close, I like to slow down below 5.5 meters of a second for a nice soft touch. Most docking ports, I believe, this is just speculation, but I believe they're magnetic. And so as you get really close, the magnetism takes over and it actually accelerates both bodies towards each other for the docking. So it may look rough. So now I'm building the booster. This is going to be first refueling pod for the lander. We put a couple small lightweight conventional rockets on the bottom of it. That will be to make orbital adjustments if we need to for the space station. But this is going to dock to the bottom of the space station, and it's going to be there primarily for the lander to transfer fuel and monopropellant for the RCS thrusters. And so, like always, I'm going to set up the second stage with a drone probe core, communications battery, and gimbals for attitude control, so that when I undock it, I can reorient its attitude into a retrograde direction and then conduct a burn to deorbit it. Like I said, I always like to leave zero trash in space. We don't want any high-speed collisions. I think there's a lot of people out there that are super worried about the Kepler effect, which is kind of a domino effect of space collisions, creating more and more small debris traveling at very high velocities would then make space uninhabitable. As it would be a minefield of high velocity pieces of metal and glass and frozen propellant and all kinds of things. I think that if you think about it in a more conventional way, if you were to put a 55-gallon drum of tennis balls into the Pacific Ocean, somewhere in the middle of it, and then wait 6 months and then drive a bunch of freighters on their route from the West Coast to China, chances are those thousands of freighters wouldn't even see one tennis ball. And so that's just one plane or one altitude of orbit. So people worry about space garbage, I think to an unreasonable degree, being that the height of the individual tennis ball, if you put one at each different plane of altitude, you're still, like, it would take trillions and trillions of pieces of space debris, in my opinion, to make space uninhabitable. And I don't really think it's ever going to happen, but I could be wrong. And so now we just conducted our transfer burn, and like always, we are going to turn around retrograde to the direction of the freight train there, cancel out our speed, nullify our speed. Then we're going to burn towards it. Then we're going to prepare for another retrograde burn. Speed up time here a little bit. And now we're slowing down, and we're within about 300 meters of the target. We'll do it one more time. And you can see as we get closer, we're going to use less speed and be less aggressive. So now this is going to go on the bottom of the orbital Duna Gateway. So I had to undock the freight train booster to make room for it, and then we will redock the booster after this is docked. And that will be our final assembly for this transfer vehicle to Mars. The next episode will be, I believe, I have to look here. The next episode will be the ground-based build. Okay, yeah, so the next one's the ground-based, and then the episode after that will be the lander. And it'll be, I call it the X-Wing fighter build and the Jedi APC build. That'll be the rover, the APC, Armored Personnel Carrier. So as you can see, everything, the bigger you get with these vehicles that you make in KSP, the more inertia they have. So the slower everything moves when you're undocking and moving things around. It takes more energy to accelerate something that weighs 100 tons to 0.5 meters a second than it does to accelerate something that weighs 1 ton. So smaller moves a lot easier, whereas you scale up, things drastically change and move a little bit slower. So anyway, here we are, getting this docked, and now this vehicle is ready for our launch. And this vehicle is looking like it's 65 kilometers. That's going to be its orbital altitude. The next one I'm going to go a little bit higher, and the next one I'm going to go a little bit higher, so that we don't get confused by too many things in orbit as we're sending more things up to dock. And once we get all three assembled, we'll be on our way.